Hello, everyone. Magandang hapon if it's the afternoon for you, as it is for us in Vancouver. It might be later or earlier, depending on where you are. Thank you all for joining us for the countrywide launch of the Malaya Movement in Canada.
Yes, hello everyone. Maraming salamat po sa pagsama sa amin ngayon sa Malaya Movement Canada launch. At magandang umaga din po para po sa mga taga-Pilipinas na kasama po natin ngayon. My name is Jeremiah and I'm one of the conveners for Malaya here in Vancouver.
And I'm Lara. I'm going to be co-emceeing with Jeremiah. I am also from Malaya Movement in Vancouver.
We have several folks joining us today, either via Zoom or through our Facebook Live. I believe our event is also being streamed on the Facebook page of Senator Laila de Lima. But before we even get started with that, I think it's important to acknowledge that we are on Indigenous territory. As Filipinos in the diaspora, I think it's important for us to connect our advocacy for freedom in the Philippines to the struggles of Indigenous folk here. Specifically, Lara and I, we are on the ancestral traditional territory of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples. So for our house rules for today, as I mentioned, folks will be joining us via Zoom or Facebook Live, and we will be taking care of like the whole thing on our end here via Zoom. Towards the end of the program, we encourage everyone to please stay a bit behind because we'll be taking a photo. It will be a great opportunity to get everyone's photo in, especially those that are supporting our launch. As well, we have our chat both on Zoom and Facebook, and we're encouraging everyone to introduce yourself, your name, your city, and why you're joining us today. And feel free to add in comments and questions in the chat that we'll be gladly responding to at a later time. So just to give you a bit of an overview of what's happening today, we start, of course, with our introductions as we are doing now. And we'll also be doing a bit of like an opening remarks from our spokesperson, Marisa Corpus, who will also be giving us a bit of information about Malaya, especially for folks that are encountering our organization for the very first time. And then from there, one of our guest speakers will be Attorney Philip Sawali, who is the Chief of Staff of Senator Laila de Lima. And from there, we will move on to our featured guest speaker, Lloyda Lewis, Attorney Lloyda Nicholas Lewis. And this will be followed up with solidarity messages and cultural performances. And from there, we'll be in touch with you with our calls to action, announcements in terms of our next events. And as I mentioned, we're encouraging everyone to please stay so we can take a group picture in the end. So for opening remarks, we'd like to call on our spokesperson, Marisa Corpus.
Magandang gabi, good evening, friends, family, and compatriots.
No, too much wasabi.
Today is an auspicious day when we formally declare to the world that we, Malaya Movement Canada, are here and that we are working together towards a better Philippines, fighting for justice, democracy, and our sovereignty. Nandito kami para sa bayan. About a year and a half ago, I was invited to an organizational meeting of Malaya Movement Toronto, and a group of young and old came together. Malaya USA just had a successful launch. Our group sat together to define our points of unity, and although similar to Malaya USA, we set forth on our own. After agreeing on this, we continued to spread the word, invited like-minded fellow kababayans to join us, took a trip to Montreal to share our ideas, and in no time at all, started to participate in meaningful events showing our support or condemnation of issues and concerns happening in the Philippines. We joined the SONA rally, held our own Never Again to Martial Law event, raised funds for the Sagip Taal concert for those affected in Taal, issued strong statements such as stop death threats against defenders in Negros, justice for Zara Alvarez and all victims of extrajudicial killing in the Philippines. We had the June 12 Declaration of Philippine Independence, joined the Global Day of Action to stop the killings in the Philippines. We also organized the weekly Malayang Kapihan, tackling issues such as the closure of ABS-CBN, Usaping COVID, the anti-terror law, the effect of ATLs on farmers and peasants, and at the last Kapihan, the number of views surpassed 6,000. And today, we shall submit an open letter addressed to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, requesting for a response to the human rights violations in the Philippines and the passing of the anti-terror law, and why Canada should be concerned. Today, Malaya Movement Canada is in Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, Alberta, and Manitoba. Malaya Movement Canada will continue to hold conversations with Phil Canadians on what's happening in the Philippines, bring together and organize our community and organizations to take a stand on key issues and concerns of our kababayans in the Philippines. All will agree that when I say that our ties to the Philippines remain strong despite the years that we've been away and the miles apart. With Malaya Canada, we come to unite and deepen this unity because we share the same vision. Where we have a Philippines where there is freedom, justice, and true democracy, and where a better life for our families and communities in the Philippines is possible. Remember, democracy dies in darkness. Let us keep the light shining in our fight for democracy and justice. And to our beloved country, again, Bayan Kong Pilipinas, nandito kami para sa inang bayan. Laban, Pilipinas. Sulong. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Marissa. That is a great, introduction to Malaya Canada. As she mentioned, we are doing an open letter to the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. We're going to be talking about how to sign that open letter today if you haven't, but I'm going to be encouraging you throughout this event that you should go to malaya.ca/open-letter and to sign our letter now. The next thing we have is our Malaya Canada song called Malayang Bayan. It's actually written by one of our conveners, Louis Quiano, and performed by Carl Ramirez and Bogs Villarreal of Pordalab Band. Afterwards, there's going to be a video compilation of some Malaya conveners from across the country, just telling you a little bit more about what Malaya is.
Tayo'y magsama-sama, halina't magkaisa. May iisang damdamin, sa isang layunin, pagmamahal sa bayan na mayroong kalayaan, demokrasya at katarungan. Isang malaya, malaya, malayang bayan. Isang malaya, malaya, malayang sambayanan. Tayo na
So if that song sounded familiar to you, we were also playing it in our house music as people were coming in today. It's also on our website and on YouTube. So please check it out again when you can.
Are you concerned about the situation in the Philippines? Are you looking for ways to make a positive impact for genuine social change in the Philippines? We are so appreciative of your interest to participate in building Malaya Movement Canada. We aim to bring together hundreds of individuals and organizations from different sectors all across Canada to discuss the major issues and concerns of the Filipino people, as well as deepen our unity in our struggle for freedom and democracy.
Under the totalitarian rule of President Duterte, the Filipinos across all sectors face tyrannical, fascist attacks on all levels. These are done under the guise of fighting the so-called insurgency or the dubious war on terror. Over 14,000 people, mostly from the ranks of the poor, have been killed in the alleged war on drugs, the war on the Moro people and other indigenous communities, and the extended martial law in Mindanao.
Politically motivated killings, arrests, detention, red tagging, and trump-up charges against citizens critical of Duterte's policies and against cause-oriented groups working to defend the rights of the people. Plans of charter change to consolidate executive powers, extend terms of elected officials, dissolve Congress, exempt lawmakers and administration officials from paying taxes, remove restrictions on 100% foreign ownership of land and strategic enterprises, and remove the ban on foreign bases with Duterte allies dominating the scene.
Attacks against critical journalists with malicious and fabricated charges, discrediting alternative media outlets and shutting down websites, thereby undermining press freedom. As Filipinos in Canada, we can have a voice and we can do something. We have a role to play in putting a stop to the killings, ending Duterte's campaign to silence dissent, and preventing the imposition of full-blown dictatorship in the Philippines.
As Filipinos in Canada, we can have a louder, united voice to defend the Filipino people who are under siege, but bravely fighting back. As Filipinos in Canada, we can work together to bring about justice and a genuine and lasting peace in the Philippines.
This movement takes action to stop the killings, end Duterte's war on drugs, and stop the killings of human rights defenders. Lift martial law in Mindanao immediately. Say no to another fascist dictatorship in the Philippines. Stop the abuse of executive power and curtailment of democratic rights and civil liberties. End the system of political dynasties and corruption in the Philippines. Stand for democracy. Pursue political, economic, and social reforms that benefit the majority of ordinary Filipinos and promote genuine, sustainable development in the Philippines. Defend Philippine sovereignty against any foreign power.
Join our movement and fill out the Malaya membership form to become a member. Your participation is critical in forging broader unity among all advocates of human rights, peace, and democracy for the Philippines across the country. Now is the time to come together and build strength in unity.
So you just saw there the message from our Malaya Canada conveners, and we're encouraging everyone to join us in Malaya Movement in Canada. Up next is a cultural performance from Han Han, a woman of many talents, a nurse, rapper, and artist. Han Han is a huge supporter of Malaya and calls Malaya as the light that shines during these dark times at home. Mabuhay Malaya, Canada. You'll be seeing a cultural performance of Han Han with Datu Hataw in a song called World Gone Crazy.
She gon' say this world has gone crazy. This world's gone crazy if she don't stay. In these last days, her mind's always tripping on another obsession, another day.
Saan ang isipan at imulat ang mata? Tingnan ng iyong paligid at ano ang nakikita. Humarap sa salamin, sa sarili ay aming hindi ka lang ginawa. Ikaw din ay manggagawa. Bata-bata, paano ka ginawa? Bata-bata, paano ka ginawa? Lumaki sa kahirapan, buong buhay lumalaban. Kailangan niyang malaman, dagdagan ang karunungan. Tuklasin ang daan tungo sa kaligayahan. Di ka lang pinanganak para lang ika'y maghirap. Alamin ang totoo para sa sarili mo. Ikaw ay nandirito, kailangan ng mundo. Bata-bata, paano ka ginawa? Bata-bata, ano ang iyong ginagawa?
She gon' say this world has gone crazy. This world's gone crazy if she don't stay.
Uy, ayaw kalimti ug ayaw ilimod sa tanang katawhan. Ibutsyag mo gayud nga ang imong naibawan di lang pansit og adobo. Unta imong maamgutin sa ka ug ako. Ikaw bakaha si Dunya Konsolasyon. Asawa sa Kastila nga mapag-aron inon. Nakitan mo na pagsisisa nga naghilak. Nawalan sa buot sa pagpangita siyang anak. Hain naman ang mga Maria Clara, ang mga Elias ug Crisostomo Ibarra. Liwat sa mga praile, papakon nga labi daug-daugon si Basilio tagon nga Pilibustero. Kini ang akong awag kaninyo mga igsoon. Untayin yung batiyon o ginyong paminawon. Nganong ang kabataan kinahanglan ng bahinon. Na ay tawgon nga FOP, na ay tawgon nga bacon. Siga ang mata o huna-huna. Ikaw ako kitang tanan kay usara. Usa ang gigikanan, usa ang dugo. Gimugna sa abo nga usa ka Pilipino. Dili mo natuhuan ang ilang mga bakak. Kini inyong anak, bisayang magbabalak. Bata-bata, paano ka ginawa? Bata-bata, ano ang iyong ginagawa?
I think we're ready now for Trini Lopez from Malaya, BC to introduce our opening speaker, Attorney Philip Sawali.
Hello. Hello, my name is Lopez of Malaya, BC. I am so pleased to present to you one of the Philippines' great defenders of the human rights, Attorney Philip Sawali.
Philip, we
Magandang
have heard
araw
of
po
you.
sa ating lahat. Maraming salamat sa imbitasyon. Ngayon ay Lunes, Setyembre 21, dito sa atin sa Pilipinas at ginugunita ng mga Pilipino ang deklarasyon ng batas militar na nangyari 48 years ago. Kaya sakto po ang paksa na ibinigay niyo po sa akin sa umagang ito upang talakayin ang human rights situation sa Pilipinas. Isang usapin na napakalaki noong panahon ng batas militar. My task today is to provide an analysis and give recommendations on two related topics: the general situation of human rights in the Philippines and the plight of the foremost human rights flag bearer, Senator Laila de Lima, who has been in unjust detention for 3.5 years now for staunchly opposing the anti-human rights policies of Duterte. Next slide, please. Since Rodrigo Duterte became the Philippine president in June 2016, there has been a human rights calamity, I emphasize, human rights calamity in the country, the worst of its kind in Philippine history. Extrajudicial killings under his so-called war on drugs remain unabated with total impunity. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, in her June 2020 report to the UN Human Rights Council, found that these killings were indeed widespread and systematic, and at least 8,663 people had been killed, with other estimates, including from the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, of more than triple that number. This is validated by previous findings from civil society, media, and the academe. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Also, there have been relentless attacks against human rights defenders and critics of the government, including activists, journalists, members of groups affiliated with the political left, and leaders of the opposition, churches, trade unions, indigenous peoples, and peasant groups. The UN High Commissioner, and I quote, verified the killings of 208 human rights defenders, including journalists and trade unionists, and 30 women under the present government. More recently, on August 17, gunmen shot dead Zara Alvarez, a paralegal for the human rights group Karapatan, and on August 10, assailants brutally murdered Randall Echanes, a leader of the peasant group Anak Pawis and a longtime activist. Next slide, please. The UN High Commissioner found that media and civil society organizations face persistent harassment, intimidation, police raids, arbitrary arrests, criminal charges, and shutdowns. In June 2020, a Manila court convicted for libel journalist Maria Ressa and Reynaldo Santos Jr., both of the news website Rappler, which had been the subject of long-running harassment and threats from the Duterte government because of its critical reporting on the anti-drug campaign. In early July, also this year, the Philippine Congress, most of whose members are allied with Duterte, voted to deny the renewal of the broadcast franchise of ABS-CBN, the country's largest TV and radio network, after years of explicit threats from President Duterte, in part because of its critical reporting on the war on drugs. Recently also, worrying new laws and amendments are vigorously being pushed by Duterte and his allies, such as the newly enacted Anti-Terrorism Act and the proposed bills to restore the death penalty for drug offenses and to significantly lower the age of criminal responsibility. Next slide, please. Until now, there has been no accountability for all these unlawful killings instigated by Duterte and perpetrated by the police and their associates. As noted in the High Commissioner's report, and I quote, "Persistent impunity for human rights violations is stark, and the practical obstacles to accessing justice within the country are almost insurmountable." End of quote. Families of victims are unable to obtain justice for their loved ones, citing the innumerable obstacles to filing cases, the continued difficulty of obtaining police or autopsy reports, and the immense fear of retaliation that they experience. This climate of total impunity affords the police and the vigilantes the uncontested space to commit further extrajudicial killings without consequence. The Duterte administration has effectively undermined institutions and processes that could have checked him and provide some measure of accountability. The House of Representatives, dominated by Duterte lackeys, did not even lift a finger in commencing any congressional inquiry. The Senate, likewise controlled by Duterte allies, thwarted a 2016 investigation initiated by Senator Laila de Lima, whose bold move caused her ouster as chair of the Senate committee and her eventual arrest and incarceration on trumped-up and politically motivated charges. The Duterte administration has withdrawn from the International Criminal Court, or ICC, following the 2018 launch of a preliminary examination into crimes against humanity committed by the Philippine government in the context of this war on drugs. During the interactive dialogue at the 44th session of the Human Rights Council last June, the Philippine Justice Secretary Minardo Guevara announced the setting up of a government panel to review more than 5,600 cases of alleged EJKs in the country. Unfortunately, the Philippine government has failed to ensure that this panel will be independent or impartial, notably because it will be led by the Department of Justice and will have among its members the very agencies, including the PNP, or the Philippine National Police, and the PDEA, or the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency, accused of being behind the killings and other violations in the war on drugs. It can be recalled that consistently, investigative agencies such as the NBI, or the National Bureau of Investigation, and the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group, or CIDG, of the PNP have hardly conducted any serious investigation into these killings. This DOJ-led panel is therefore the latest attempt by the Duterte administration to evade international scrutiny for violations rather than a sincere attempt to foster domestic accountability. Now I go to the persecution of Senator De Lima. In the meantime that these atrocities are happening, Duterte's #1 critic, Senator De Lima, remains in jail since her arrest on February 24, 2017, for more than 3.5 years. Senator De Lima is the Philippines' most decorated human rights defender, one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people in the world in 2017, one of 50 greatest leaders named by Fortune magazine in 2018, and the honoree of the same year's prestigious prize for freedom from Liberal International. She is, however, the most maligned and demonized human rights advocate and political dissenter we have today. In August 2016, just barely a month into presidency, Duterte vowed to, and I quote, destroy her in public and that she will rot in jail. From that cue, almost the entire apparatus of Philippine government has been turned into a giant machine of oppression against Senator De Lima. A choir of drug felons was assembled to testify falsely that Senator De Lima, as then Justice Secretary in the past administration, was the protector of illegal drug trade and other illicit activities at the National Penitentiary, what we call here the National Bilibid Prison. Then Justice Secretary Vitaliano Aguirre paraded these alleged witnesses and made a show trial before a cheering and slut-shaming crowd of pro-Duterte congressmen during the September to October 2016 hearings of the Committee on Justice at the House of Representatives. With obvious haste, bypassing the constitutional authority of the Office of the Ombudsman, then Justice Secretary Aguirre proceeded informing a panel of investigating prosecutors who fast-tracked the filing in regular criminal courts of non-bailable offenses of drug trading against the senator. The charges are mostly based on testimonies of self-confessed drug lords and high-profile inmates who are serving long sentences at the National Penitentiary. The DOJ filed an amended information or charge sheet against Senator De Lima in all the three cases, changing the charge from illegal drug trading to conspiracy to engage in illegal drug trade. This happened, the changing of the charge sheet, after more than a year from filing of the cases and without the benefit of new or reopened preliminary investigation at the DOJ. Worse, despite the glaring breaches of substantive rights and procedural rules, the judges accepted the substituted charges and kept Senator De Lima in jail up to now. Meanwhile, 6 judges have withdrawn from the cases. Trial is dragging. Worse, after not being able to prove the allegations, the government continues to fabricate evidence by asking the convict witnesses to embellish their testimonies. There is no other evidence aside from the oral testimonies of these convicted witnesses who are even disqualified from becoming witnesses for the government because they are convicts of crimes involving moral turpitude. Senator De Lima recently filed 2 motions or petitions for bail in 2 cases and are about to file the last one for the 3rd case. These petitions for bail clearly show that the government has no evidence against De Lima. However, the judge might allow the prosecution to present the embellished testimonies of the convicts to give the prosecution another chance, and possibly the judge herself also, another chance to present grounds, quote-unquote grounds for conviction. Aside from these judicial harassments and abuses of legal processes, massive and unrelenting vilification and disinformation campaigns have been waged against Senator De Lima within and outside government, and also online and offline. No less than President Duterte, presidential spokespersons Harry Roque and Sal Panelo, and their political allies, along with operators and Duterte fanatics in the mainstream and social medias, have been targeting her as objects of misogynistic, utterly foul, and sometimes even nonsensical remarks. Fake videos, fake news, and other sources of false information or disinformation about Senator De Lima have been circulating with no let-up. While it is easy to ascertain the origins of the persecution of Senator De Lima, her unflinching stand for human rights and political dissent, and Duterte's dogged determination to silence her, a deeper analysis is needed to determine why these injustices persist and how Duterte's massive machine of oppression has remained unstoppable. Duterte is on a rampage, and so far he has been effective in his project of killing Philippine democracy, of obliterating the system of checks and balances in government, of disabling mechanisms of accountability for the abuses and misconduct, and of incapacitating the institutions of free speech, the right of association, and assembly, and other fundamental freedoms. This is highly evident in the case of Senator De Lima. Supposedly, professional prosecutors went along Duterte and Aguirre's pronouncement that form the basis of politically motivated and trumped-up cases. Judicial officers, judges at the trial court, justices at the Court of Appeals, and even magistrates of the Supreme Court, who supposedly belong to an independent branch of government, have all failed to counter and put a stop to the repression of Senator De Lima's rights. In the other co-equal department, the legislature, most members of the supermajorities at the House of Representatives and the Senate have made things worse by either actively participating in or simply tolerating and the ganging up of Senator De Lima. Many practitioners in the mainstream media and online influencers have either been cowed, corrupted, or blinded to take the side of truth and accountability. Even segments of pro-democracy forces have either been reluctant, tentative, or simply unorganized to be mobilized in alleviating the situation of a fellow human rights defender and political dissenter. So what do we do now? What are recommended steps? I'm wrapping up my presentation
Okay,
here.
thank you, Attorney Sawali. We will do the wrap up now. Thanks.
Okay, so what can we do? Let's call out all false information and baseless allegation, whether they come from a high officials or a high official or an ordinary Facebook user. Number two, let's demand accountability from our government officials and leaders. Let's remind the media and social media about the responsibility of telling the truth and for holding responsible those in power. Also, let's help in lobbying for the passage of key human rights policies like the anti-EJK bill, while opposing the restoration of death penalty and the lowering of age of criminal responsibility. Next slide, please. In the international arena, we should help in urging the ICC to please fast-track the process to conclude the preliminary examination and proceed to the next stage. And we can lobby foreign governments like Canada or US to impose targeted sanctions under the Global Magnitsky Act and other similar sanctions regime. At the UN, there's an ongoing UN Human Rights Council session right now. We should push to pursue an independent international investigation of EJKs and other human rights violations in the Philippines. We should urge the High Commissioner to continue monitoring and comprehensively reporting on the situation in the Philippines. And we should pressure the Philippines. The Philippines is a member of the Human Rights Council. So dapat mataas ang standard niya. In fact, dapat mayroon siyang standard for human rights compliance. And then, in the case of Senator De Lima, we can lobby the Philippine government to implement the UN Working Group against arbitrary detention recommendations. May recommendation po nung isang taon pa na palayain siya, drop the charges, and now we heard po fairly recently, just a few days ago, the EU Parliament, the European Parliament in Brussels adopted a resolution calling on the Philippine government to free Senator De Lima. Tulungan po natin na ito ay masakatuparan. And lastly, we can write relevant government authorities in all branches of Philippine government, especially the courts. Just remind them, do justice, render justice to Senator De Lima and other political dissenters and human rights defenders. Do I still have time to read the solidarity message of Senator De Lima?
Yes, please. We're looking forward to the message from
quickly.
her.
Allow me to cap my presentation here with the solidarity message on your occasion, the launching of Malaya Movement in Canada. My warmest greetings and congratulations on the formal launching of the Malaya Movement in Canada. Thank you for this opportunity to be a part of your meaningful occasion to tackle the dire state of our nation, raise the level of public discourse, and to stand up for our Filipino ideals and values. Though you may be far away from our country, I greatly feel your unwavering concern to pursue the needed change for the best interest of our countrymen, to uphold social justice, alleviate poverty, and defend human rights and democracy. Maraming salamat. I also want to express my gratitude for your continued support and faith in me in the more than in more than 3 years that I have been illegally and unjustly detained. I find courage and strength from co-warriors like you who do not think twice to speak truth to power in ending the tyrannical rule of the vindictive Duterte regime. There is no doubt many Filipinos here and abroad have been enlightened with the truth about the incompetence of the Duterte administration in serving our people, especially in times of crisis, as well as in protecting our sovereignty. We will not allow them to take us for a ride in the remainder of their term. We will not fall for their selfish agenda of setting up a new and dangerous type of government to remain in power. And so, we will not relent. We will not slacken, confident as we are that our continued resistance and growing solidarity are the wellsprings of hope for our people in our collective struggle to end the culture of impunity and the climate of fear, and to halt the atmosphere of ineptitude that have engulfed our country in the past 4 years. At hindi tayo titigil hanggang hindi tayo magtagumpay para sa ating bayan at mga kababayan. Kailangan pa nating magparami at magpalakas para tuloy-tuloy na maipanalo ang ating mga laban para sa demokrasya, soberanya, karapatang pantao at matinong pamumuno. Ang ating pagsasama-sama ngayon at patuloy na pagkakaisa ang magwawakas sa mapaniil na sistema at tuluyang magpapalaya sa mga Pilipino. Muli, isang malugod na pagbati at mapagpalayang araw sa lahat. May lagda, Laila M. De Lima, Senator, Republic of the Philippines, and a prisoner of conscience. September 20, 2020, PNP Custodial Center, Camp Crame, Quezon City. Marami pong salamat. Mabuhay ang Malaya Movement.
Maraming salamat, Attorney Sawali, for giving your presentation and also for giving us the message from Senator De Lima. We are going to have a quick cultural performance between now and our next speaker from Porta Lab Band.
At marami ang nagugutom. Hindi ka ba napapahala? Nasaan ang pagkumlan? Kung meron man sinong pinalad, ikaw ba'y naghanap ng lunas? wakas. At ito ang panahon, mag-alay sa bayan, kumilos ngayon, baguhin ang mundo, ating yanigin, lalaya tayo. Baklasin ang mga harang sa ating paglusong. Puso ay alay sa bayan, tayo ay babangon. Mag-alay sa bayan, 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 mag-alay. Damhin ng panahon, delubyo ay nagpapatya, at marami ang nagugutom. Kami ay nababahala, at nasaan ang pagkulat? Kung meron man sinong pinalat, ikaw ba'y naghahanap ng lunas? Magsama tayo upang lumakas. At ito ang panahon, mag-alay sa bayan, kumilos ngayon, baguhin ang mundo, ating yanigin, lalaya tayo. Baklasin ang mga harang sa ating paglusong. Puso ay alay sa bayan, tayo ay babangon. Baklasin ang mga harang sa ating paglusong. Puso ay alay sa bayan, tayo ay babangon. Damhin ng panahon, delubyo ay nagpapasya, at marami ang nagugutom. Meron tayong magagawa.
Maraming salamat sa For the Lab for that cultural performance. Maraming salamat sa musika at inyong pagmamahal sa bayan. And now we will proceed to our special guest speaker for tonight. She is a business leader and philanthropist and one of the most respected Filipino Americans in the United States, and is also active in promoting all aspects of the Philippines for global recognition. She is also a notable supporter of many organizations that uphold human rights and equity in legal defense. She's a champion of women's rights as well as arts and education, and a staunch supporter of the Malaya Movement and an advocate for all things correct, just, and Filipino. Mga kababayan, fellow Filipinos, please welcome Attorney Loida Nicolas Lewis.
Thank you. Salamat. Maraming salamat, Jeremiah and Lara. And to Marisa Corpus, especially being the head of the Malaya Canada, and to Trini Lopez for going after me several times to be here in this rally in a way. And I also want to thank Bituin Aquino for doing the visuals in my talk. So I was very, very touched by the singing of Por the Love. I think it's For the Love of Country. And for the very impassioned speech by our, by Attorney Philip, who is representing Laila de Lima. Now, we are celebrating today because in the Philippines, it's already September 21. And I want to those of you who were alive then, September 21, 1972, Ferdinand Marcos, President of the Philippines, declared martial law. And that was the darkest part of our history. It lasted until February 25, 1986, with the people power, and the whole world rejoiced because it was the end of the tyranny of the Marcos administration and the beginning, hopefully, of freedom. So we had 20 years under President Cory Aquino, under President Fidel Ramos, then a short term from ERAP, and then our president after ERAP was Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, and then Ninoy Aquino, and then came our present President Duterte. And I just want to show you how, although President Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law, in a manner of speaking, President Duterte has already started martial law in the Philippines. So may I have the first? Yes. Martial law was Marcos in 1972. In 2016, Duterte started to weaponize the law and really started a slow process of martial law. Next slide, please. During the 20 years of Marcos' rule, 3,257 activists, journalists, radio announcers, but suspected activists, people who are announcing, were taken out, and either they were tortured and killed or they disappeared under the so-called salvaging, 3,200. But here, with President Duterte, 29,000 have been killed by the police on the suspicion that they are drug dealers, drug addicts, and that is from the Philippine National Police. And out of that, they say that 5,000 were just suspects who died because kunyari linabanan sila. Okay, so President Duterte promised, I will stop the drugs in the Philippines within 6 months when I become president, and he did not. All right. In fact, drugs are proliferating, and there has been no drug lord that has been killed. So my suspicion is President Duterte may be the supreme drug lord, because up to now, no drug lord has been killed by his police. Next one, please. Under Marcos, during martial law, he closed ABS-CBN and everything else, every radio station, newspaper in 1972. But here, under Duterte, without any, any violent act, he was able to get the committee on, and the lower house, the committee on granting permits to ABS-CBN. I think there were 72 of them, and except for a few, everybody said, yes, shut down ABS-CBN. I mean, by the stroke of their pen, by not bringing the permit to Congress, ABS-CBN was shut down. and 11,000 people were thrown out of job. The very powerful radio station of ABS-CBN was cut down, which is sometimes the only way that our people in the remote provinces or parts of the Philippines could know. So quiet it down. That's another way of declaring martial law. Aside from that, of course, Maria Ressa has been charged 3 times with made-up crimes, just like they made up crimes against Senator Leila de Lima, because Rappler, the digital mass communications founded by Maria Ressa, was very critical of Duterte. So he wants to shut down everybody who criticizes him. Next, during martial law, everybody knew that the people in his cabinet were all taking money. Kleptocracy, that was rampant. And our foreign debt increased from $1 billion to $25 billion. And we are still paying that rent, that increase in foreign debt during the Marcos time. However, during Duterte's time now, crony capitalism, all of the characters are not changing, according to Leila Rimando, a journalist who is writing a book on the Philippine business elite. They're just being added to. And one former high-ranking elected official went a step farther, from taking down a system of businessmen and politicians working together for personal profit. Duterte is cultivating his own set of cronies. And that is coming from the Asia magazine, how Duterte embraced the oligarchs. So there is no difference, if not more, because now everybody in government is on the take. Lahat nagnanakaw. Sus Mariosep. The rising corruption. Under Marcos, corruption was institutionalized. And under Duterte, we are now ranked from the lowest. 180 nations are being ranked whether they are the most corrupt or the least corrupt. Starting from number 1, the least corrupt, all the way down to 180, the most corrupt. And where are we as Philippines? 113 from the lowest. Before, we were number 82. Ngayon, lumagpak pa tayo na talagang napaka-corrupt. And that is from the international media. The last one that I want to say is Duterte has given up the Philippines in one conference where he was celebrating the Chinese-Filipino Friendship Association. He said on stage, the Philippines is now a province of China. And so he has allowed China to just come into the Philippines. 3 million Chinese are in the Philippines, taking jobs away from the Filipinos. Ang masasabi ko lamang, kawawang Pilipinas. And we who are in the United States can only speak out, lobby our congressmen, and I am saying to everybody, this election, those of you who are in the United States, this election is truly fighting for the soul of America. Why? Because we have Biden, a man of integrity, a true leader, against President Trump, who is, totally narcissistic. Not only that, he is ignorant, unable to really lead the nation in this biggest pandemic that we have had, and lying to the American people when we had already in our shores coronavirus COVID-19. And also, President Trump always has respect for those who are tyrants, like Putin, like Xi Jinping, like Duterte. So please, for those who are going to vote in the United States, think very carefully what kind of America we want. We want America to be great again, so vote Biden, Harris. Last of all, I ask you, those who are listening in the Philippines, sa Filipinas, magising naman kayo. Kayo ay tinitiris na ng presidente. Ang daming taong walang pagkain dahil sa itong ating pandemic sa the COVID-19 in the Philippines was not only threatened by the president instead of giving out the proper health conditions so that we will stop also the spread of coronavirus in the Philippines. So magising po kayo na nasa Pilipinas. Huwag kayong tanga, huwag kayong baliw, huwag kayong bulag, huwag kayong bingi. Ano ang nangyari sa inyo? You are better off now than 4 years ago? You are worse. So I call on all the Filipinos in the Philippines. Mag-isip-isip kayo kung anong dapat yung gawin sa 2022. Of course, everybody knows I'm for Leni Robredo. Pero kayong nasa Pilipinas, please, isipin nyo ang kalagayan ninyo. Huwag kayong magpapaalipin. Huwag kayong magtiis ng magtiis at tawa na lang ng tawa sa mga mura ng presidente. Isipin nyo ang kalagayan ninyo, ng inyong mga anak at mga apo. Marami pong salamat.
Thank you, Attorney Nicholas Lewis, for your wonderful message at sa iyong panawagan para sa ating mga kababayan dito po sa Canada at pati na rin po sa Pilipinas and around the world. Ngayon naman po, may mga tanong po tayo sa ating mga kasama ngayon. We have a few questions from our participants and Lara will be leading us towards that discussion.
Thank you, Jeremiah, and maraming salamat to Attorney Nicholas Lewis. We have a few questions that I've received in the chat, and I'm going to actually consolidate a few that are really similar. And I think I'm going to give you like 3 broad questions out of these various questions I've received. The first one is about overseas Filipinos, how we can counter the combined threat from Duterte and also from his military followers, especially under the new anti-terror law. So how do we mobilize people even though there are these things happening that they might be afraid of? The other one is, can you expand on your views of asserting Philippine sovereignty, especially from incursions by the US and China? And then the other one is about the history of Marcos and it being revived as a positive history or a hero's history, and your opinion of that that is happening now, especially in his hometown of Ilocos. So those are the 3 questions. I can repeat them, but maybe the first one I will say again is about how do we mobilize, especially as overseas Filipinos, when there are these new laws and reactions from the state that make people afraid.
Okay, the anti-terror law, for those who are not aware, was signed into law by President Duterte in July 2022. That's just 3 months ago. And then, thank God, there were the progressive forces in the Philippines that filed a case in the Supreme Court to say it is unconstitutional. So what does anti-terror law? It says anybody who says anything negative about President Duterte can be arrested, and there is no need to get any warrant of arrest. Talagang preso agad. So it is similar to the anti-terror law passed in Hong Kong, where the Hong Kong citizens are, protesting against because it was dictated by China. So this anti-terror law is dictated by China, and Duterte copied it word for word. So ayun na tayo, probinsya na tayo ng China. And the question is, how do we do that? How do we fight this? Is that the question?
Yeah, so how do we mobilize people even though there might be things they're afraid of with reactions?
How do we mobilize in the Philippines? Sa akin, narason kayo sa Pilipinas, kayo ang mag-unite. Dito lang sa United States, I'm saying, let us elect our congressmen and senators who will be for freedom in the Philippines, for democracy in the Philippines. And let's elect the president who will be for us, for democracy and freedom in the Philippines, and that's Joe Biden. Second question.
The next question is about your thoughts, expanding on your thoughts on sovereignty in the Philippines, especially with incursions and the relationship of the Duterte government to China.
All right. China is aware that the Philippines is so rich. Why do they want the Philippines? It has been proven during the tripartite combination of China, Vietnam, and the Philippines under President Gloria Macapagal, that we have in our West Philippine Sea billion barrels of oil and trillion cubic feet of natural gas. Napakayaman ng Pilipinas. Pobre-pobre lang tayo. So we cannot get it. And so what does China see? Aha! They have the energy, the oil, and the natural gas that will fuel the 1 billion, maybe 1.3 million, 1.3 billion Chinese who are going into middle class. They need energy. And so, saan kukunin? Sa atin. So the Philippine government under Foreign Secretary Albert Del Rosario filed a case in the International Tribunal, which decided around 4 years ago that we, the Philippines, have control over our natural EEZ, exclusive economic zone. So the international body said, China, get out. You don't have a right to be within the exclusive economic zone on the Philippines. Unfortunately, we have not been able to fight China on this, and including the United States failed us. Although now they're sending ships there to guide, to prevent the possession of the West Philippine Sea or West China Sea by the Chinese, by the Chinese government. So that's the sovereignty question. We have sovereignty, but our President Duterte is saying, China, come over, take over us. Sus Mariosep. My God, we sing, sa manlulupig, di ka pa sisiil, but here we are, sinisiil na tayo ng China, and President Duterte said, sige, pasok kayo. My God. Okay, forgive me for exclaiming my frustration with this president. What's the last question?
So actually, we've gotten a lot of questions, but I think in the interest of time, I'll go to maybe a quick question that we were asked, which is, if you were to say something to the Duterte supporters and believers that are still out there, what would be your words to them in pursuit of justice?
Get ready for election 2022, because right now you say you rally, quit. He's not gonna do it. All right, and our congressmen and senators, except for, are all under his pocket. And Duterte has a lot of money, believe me. That's why I suspect he is also. That's why I suspect he is also the. I suspect that he is also the drug lord, because he has so much money, and now he wants Bongo, Senator Bongo, who was his right-hand man and left-hand man, to become president, not his daughter, kasi hindi niya makokontrolan si Sara. So, kayong mga nasa Pilipinas, get ready for 2022. All right? Huwag kayong bulag, huwag kayong bingi, huwag kayong tanga. Because kami sa Amerika, we are here. Kayo ang nagsihirap dyan. So, get ready, organize. Organize, organize. And unang-una, your barangay captain, kung siya ay para kay Duterte, then vote him out. Yan lang masasabi ko. Kayong nasa Pilipinas, kayong bahala, kayo ang responsibilidad nyo ang inyong sariling kabuhayan. So start to organize for 2022. Vote Lenny Robredo.
Thank you so much, Attorney Nicholas Lewis. I thought that those were very strong messages of hope, and also to mobilize our fellow Filipinos, both in the Philippines and here and abroad as well. I think an important point that you brought about is how we Filipinos in the diaspora can mobilize with the help of people in the government. Because there is a Malaya movement actually in the United States, they've already mobilized more than 50 elected members of Congress who have written to the Philippine ambassador to ask President Duterte to repeal the terror law. And we are doing the same thing in Canada. So later on, Lara Maestro will be showing us how not only you can support Malaya, but how you can help sign this open letter to Trudeau, but also to get to speak to your members of parliament, your members of your legislative assemblies, to speak up and to demand the Philippines to be accountable for all these things. Maraming salamat po, Attorney Nicholas Lewis. And now we will proceed to another cultural presentation. And this time it's with Belinda Corpus. And this is a piece called Rage by the Jerks.
Children begging at the streets at night, knocking on cars until the morning light. People standing in line for a kilo of rice. Welcome to the dark ages, the era of lies. Dreams of progress, of visions gone mad, and all are still drenched with innocent blood. Demolition men rumbles through smoky mountain holes. Darkness indeed, justice dressed in gloom. But I'll go not gently into the night, rage against the dying of the light, sing a song about this terrible sight, rage until the lightning strikes. Go not gently, go not gently, go not gently and rage with me. Go not gently, go not gently, go not gently and rage with me. The names and faces of tyrants change, but poverty, pain, and murder remains, and the voices of truth are locked up in chains. Darkness remains, freedom in flames. But I'll go not gently into the night, rage against the dying of the light, sing a song about this terrible sight, rage Go not gently, go not gently in rage with me. Go not gently, 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 go not gently. Rage with me.
So that was a great video by Belinda Corpus. It's a great message too, and it continues on very well from Attorney Lewis's speech. You know, we shouldn't go gently, we should continue to fight. And something I'm going to do right now, I'm going to show you one way that you can commit to an action to fight for liberty in the Philippines. I encourage you all to follow along with me. What I'm going to do is show you how you can add your name to the open letter that Malaya Canada has made that we are going to submit to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, calling for a response to the extrajudicial killings and the escalating human rights violations in the Philippines. So I actually would like, if you all can, to go to https://malaya.ca. Actually, you can just go to malaya.ca. I lied. You don't have to do the first part. Just go to malaya.ca and we can do this together. We can sign this open letter together. So if you've gotten to our website, you can scroll down and it's actually right on our first page that you can see here. So click and you'll be taken immediately to the form where you can sign our letter. You just have to scroll down, add your first name, your first and last name, your postal code, so it is expecting you to be in Canada, and then tell us if you want to keep updated with the Malaya movement. So, you know, we're launching today and we're going to continue to have campaigns and calls for justice, and we want you to be involved. We want you to join us and to make change together. So please click yes on that box, put your email address there so we can get in touch with you, and then click submit, and you will have done one thing that you can do really easily, really low barrier to fight for human rights in the Philippines. So I'd really encourage you to do that. Once again, malaya.ca, it's right there as a button on the front page. You don't even have to go to any other tabs. Really easy to do. And now that I've shown you, I will expect to have seen many more signatures added onto our open letter by the end of today. So please pass it on. Yeah, and I guess, you know, this is your action break, and we'll go back to our regular programming, which is solidarity messages and some cultural performances next.
So thank you, Lara. As Lara's mentioned, we will be moving on to our solidarity message from solidarity messages from from different organizations. We will be starting. We will be having some solidarity messages from Migrante Canada and Anakbayan Canada, which will be followed by a cultural performance by Lala Luciano.
On behalf of Migrante Canada, I congratulate the organizers and conveners of the Malaya Movement in Canada on its launching day. We join you in celebrating this victorious day. Like the Marcos regime, Duterte's regime is marred by massive poverty, social inequality, widespread corruption, human rights violations, and extrajudicial killings. He has even surpassed Marcos in terms of mass murder. The retired high-ranking military officials that dominate strategic position in his cabinet only serves to expose his militaristic approach to solving problems like the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead of addressing the legitimate demands of the people of land for the tillers and job for the workers, the Duterte's regime's response is harassment, red tagging, and killings. This situation reminds us of the dark days of the martial law under the dictator of Marcos. And as we did before with Marcos, we will frustrate Duterte in his quest for a dictatorial rule. Your launch is not just timely, it responds to the urgent task to build a broader unity among Filipinos to expose and oppose the tyrannical character of the Duterte regime and to struggle for a sovereign and democratic Philippines. We hope that Malaya Movement in Canada will serve as a vehicle to enlighten and mobilize the 800,000 Filipinos living in the different provinces of Canada with different level of awareness of what is happening back home. You face a big challenge how to encourage our kababayan to get involved in Malaya Movement. It will take a lot of effort, creativity, and resourcefulness to be able to persuade them to be part of this noble cause. But we know that with the help of other freedom-loving and social justice-oriented organizations, groups, and individuals, together we can fulfill our common aspirations. Mabuhay kayo!
Militant greetings to all. Bayan Canada congratulates the organizers and conveners of Malaya Canada. Your work of organizing Malaya Canada started more than a year ago today. Today's launch is historic and significant. It is historic because today is the eve of the commemoration of Marcos' martial law regime in the Philippines. It is significant because you have reached out to a broad range of our kababayan who are deeply concerned with the tyranny and corruption of the Duterte regime. In 2016, the overseas Filipinos cheered and welcomed the ascendancy to the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte. Today, 4 years after, overseas Filipinos are organizing, resisting Duterte because he failed to deliver his promises. The war on drugs failed and killed thousands of Filipinos. There is no end to corruption and scandal. The overseas Filipinos under Duterte became more milking cows through more estate exactions. And this COVID-19 pandemic health crisis, the state abandoned our kababayan. Tama na. Sobra na. Ito ang sigaw natin noong panahon ni Marcos. Let us work together to arouse, mobilize, and organize the Filipinos in Canada to end the corruption and the terror of the Duterte regime. Overseas Filipinos in Canada took active part in the ouster of Marcos and Estrada. Let us once again join forces to end Duterte, the tyranny of Duterte. Mabuhay ang Malaya Canada, mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino.
Anak Bayan Canada extends its warmest congratulations to Malaya Movement in Canada for a successful launch. We know you have been working hard on mobilizing our kababayan, especially as the conditions in the Philippines continue to worsen.
For years, we have seen the failure of the Duterte administration. This administration is responsible for tens of thousands of extrajudicial killings, subservience to foreign interest, and attacks on democracy of the Filipino people, both in the Philippines and abroad.
As Anak Bayan Canada, it is our job to educate, organize, and mobilize Filipino youth to fight for genuine democracy and a just and lasting peace in the Philippines. By working with Malaya Canada, we hope to unite more of our kababayan to continue to fight against these injustices and to assert our rights as Filipino people, including the youth. Tama na! Sobra na! People power na! Tama na! Sobra na! People power na! Tama na! Sobra na! People power na! Congratulations, Malaya Canada!
So now we have our, thank you so much for the messages from Anak Bayan Canada, and Migrante Canada. And now we have a cultural performance from talented young artists from Alberta, Laila Luciano, and a piece called Di Pangkaraniwan with original music by Danny Fabella.
This song is called Di Pangkaraniwan by Danny Fabella. Zara Alvarez and Randy Echanes are truly Di Pangkaraniwan. They were brutally killed in the times of political killings under the fascist Duterte regime. They are human rights defenders and peacemakers. They will live on in the people's struggle for national liberation. Justice for Kasamang Zara and Randy, justice for all the victims of these political killings. Kahanga-hanga kayong ang sarili, lain sa pagsisilbi. Kayong ang ligaya ay nasang ngiti ng bawat dukha't api. Walang hinahangad na gantimpala, kundi ang makitang bayan ay malaya. Walang katumbas ni anumang halaga, dakila ang iyong gawa. Mabuhay kayong mga di pangkaraniwan, pag-ibig ninyo'y ay walang hangganan. Mabuhay kayong lubos ang katapatan, mabuhay kayo kailanman. Kahanga-hanga kayong bumabago sa lipunan at sa mundo. Kabuluhan ninyo'y namamalagi at di maitatanggi. Sa bawat pahina ng kasaysayan ay gintong talang laging masisilayan at kahulugan sa mahirap. Liwanag ng isang bagong bukas. Mabuhay kayong mga di pangkaraniwan, pag-ibig ninyo'y ay walang hangganan. Mabuhay kayong lubos ang katapatan, mabuhay kayo kailanman. Mabuhay kayong puno ng pag-asa, nagpapatuloy, hindi mapibiko kailanman. Lubos ang katapatan, mabuhay kayo kailanman. Mabuhay kayong mga di pangkaraniwan, pag-ibig ninyo'y ay walang hangganan. Mabuhay kayong lubos ang katapatan, mabuhay kayo, mabuhay kayo, mabuhay kayo kailanman.
Great. Thank you for that performance, Lila, who's also from Anak Bayan, Alberta. Next up, we have a group of solidarity messages from the Filipino-Canadian Students Association, or PhilCasa Connect, from Gabriela BC, from Orly and Flor Marcelino, from the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines Canada chapter, from the Philippine Advancement Through Arts and Culture Organization, or PATAC, and from Migrants Resource Center Canada. And it will end with a poem from Patria Rivera, which is entitled The Emperor Haiku.
Hi, Malaya, Canada. My name is Daniela Salcedo, the president of the Filipino-Canadian Students Association, also known as FILCASA. On behalf of our executive board and the rest of the FILCASA community, I'd like to congratulate you for the countrywide launch of the Malaya Movement. It is indeed important to stand for fundamental rights back home, as so many disadvantaged individuals are constantly subject to human rights violations by the Philippine government. Again, we thank you for launching this movement, and we stand in solidarity with you. Magsama tayo para sa Malayang Bayan.
As Filipinos living in Canada, we have access to education, resources, and the ability to speak up for what we believe in. That being said, it is crucial for us to acknowledge our privilege and speak up against fascist dictatorship and killings in the Philippines, and to stand up for democracy for our kababayans back home.
Okay, go.
As Filipinos living in Canada, we have access to education, resources, and the ability to speak up for what we believe in. That being said, it is crucial for us to acknowledge our privilege and speak up against fascist dictatorship and killings in the Philippines, and to stand up for democracy for our kababayans back home.
Gabriela BC sends its warm greetings and congratulations to Malaya Canada for its official countrywide launch. As we come up to another anniversary of the declaration of martial law in the Philippines, we collectively reflect on the past and its continuation into the present.
Fascism is far from a figment of the past for Filipinos. Under the US-backed President Duterte, state-sanctioned violence, repression of dissidents, economic exploitation, and foreign domination have not only continued for Filipinos, but worsened. As the pandemic rages on unabated in the country, Duterte has not responded with social and economic aid, but even more brazen attacks against activists and the people.
Under his regime, we've seen nationwide militarization policies such as Executive Order 70 and Memorandum Order 32, the killings of poor people under the so-called drug war, the killings of activists and human rights defenders in the midst of vicious red tagging and terrorist tagging campaigns, and the anti-terror law criminalizing the people's right to dissent.
These de facto martial law policies and acts batter a country already struggling with a pandemic, under which the Duterte government has failed to plan and deliver a comprehensive and countrywide social relief and economic aid program.
As Filipino women, we also call specific attention to how Duterte's macho fascistic regime has affected women. Under nationwide militarization policies, peasant, poor, and indigenous women in the countryside face increased risk of violence, displacement, harassment, and attacks. Under the Visiting Forces Agreement with the U.S. servicemen also enjoy impunity for any crimes committed against women and any Filipino on Philippine soil. The recent release of Joseph Scott Pemberton, the murderer of trans woman Jennifer Laude, is a blatant manifestation of Duterte's puppetry to the U.S.
The time for the broadest united opposition to fascism in the Philippines is now. Gabriela BC is proud to support and celebrate the launching of Malaya Canada. We are invigorated and inspired by the emergence of an anti-fascist alliance for democracy and freedom in the Philippines.
Congratulations, Malaya Canada.
Maalap na pagbati sa lahat.
Warmest greetings to everyone.
I am Orly Marcelino.
Ako po si Flor Marcelino.
And we are delighted to hear of the launch of Malaya Movement in Canada. This is a most welcome development.
Our Filipino-Canadian community needs to know the real situation happening in the old country. Without a strong free press and protection for media practitioners, the world will never hear or see the deplorable violation of human rights in the Philippines.
We all know of endemic grafted corruption in all government levels. There are countless blatant abuses of power which bring hardship and trauma on vulnerable citizens already suffering from the pandemic.
It is heartbreaking many poor people die without receiving needed medical care. The extrajudicial killings of farmers, labor leaders, community organizers, in addition to those suspected of involvement in addictive drugs, bring back painful history of living during the martial law era. What is happening now in the Philippines is a horror movie we've seen before.
We were young adults during the Marcos dictatorship and military rule. We saw firsthand the tragedy that befell many young, promising leaders of the country, along with anyone marked as enemies of the state. Those people simply voiced their opposition to dictatorship, corruption, and gross violations to life and liberty. The systemic repression began with the suspension of the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus in 1971, followed by the imposition of martial law in September 1972.
Even though we live far away from the Philippines, yet we cannot remain unmoved by the sufferings of compatriots. We Filipino Canadians can be a beacon of light to those who are in the dark shadows of despair and desolation.
We can be a strong voice to those who face oppression. We in Canada can lend our moral and material support to those courageous journalists and broadcasters being hit hard with malicious and fabricated charges to silence their voices.
Thank you to the organizers of the Malaya Movement in Canada for spearheading this needed initiative to address the human rights situations in the Philippines.
Mabuhay po tayong lahat. Salamat po.
Salamat po.
Bonsoir. Je m'appelle Patricia Lisson. Je suis le président de la Coalition internationale pour la protection des droits de la personne aux Philippines. Bonsoir. My name is Patricia Lisson, and I am the chairperson of the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, Canada. The International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, Canada would like to congratulate the Malaya Movement in Canada and offer our support as you formalize your Canada-wide movement. Your tireless work and support for the cause of freedom and democracy in the Philippines are commendable and a symbol of your commitment to seeking justice as a condition for true peace and genuine human rights in the Philippines. In light of the evidence that the Philippine government is moving in a perilous direction, placing human rights defenders, government critics, farmers, church leaders, lawyers, and those working to improve the ordinary Filipino's life in grave danger. It is essential for us to work together to denounce the human rights tragedy unfolding in the Philippines. Every day the situation becomes graver, with new measures by the Duterte regime to oppress, harass, murder social and human rights activists. Turning the response to the COVID-19 public health crisis into a military response, filling senior cabinet positions with ex-military and police. The shoot to kill order leads Filipinos and the international community to believe there is a new military dictatorship in the making. As we address these flagrant human rights abuses, iChirp Canada is proud to be in solidarity with the Malaya Movement. We look forward to developing a strong partnership to address our common struggle for human rights and a just peace in the Philippines. Thank you.
On behalf of the Philippine Advancement through Arts and Culture, we express our solidarity with Malaya Canada in their advocacy to stand for democracy, pursue political, economic, and social reforms that benefit the majority of ordinary people, and promote genuine sustainable development in the Philippines. Stop the killings, end the war on drugs, and rescind the Anti-Terrorism Act 2020, which has been used as a cover to target movements and individuals seeking change. defend Philippine sovereignty against any foreign interference. The role you play is critical in highlighting the human rights violations in the Philippines and the quest for independence from foreign domination. In these dark times, we need to strengthen our commitment to bring an end to all injustices and atrocities perpetrated against peace-loving people. Mabuhay ang Malaya, Canada!
The Migrants Resource Center Canada congratulates Malaya Movement in Canada on your official launch today. As a migrant service institution, we know quite well that migrant workers leave the Philippines due to unemployment, poverty, and lack of access to social services. Many of them endure hardship in order to provide for their families who are directly affected by the economic crisis and the political turmoil in the Philippines. We believe that migrant workers should be afforded their rights while working here in Canada. However, we also believe that migration should be a choice, not something people are forced to do because of the dire economic, social, and political situation in their home country. Malaya Movement's Points of Unity is a great rallying point for the members of the diaspora community, including the migrant workers, to discuss, organize, and enact meaningful and inclusive change for the Philippines. We look forward to many of your successes in the coming future. Mabuhay, Malaya, Canada!
The Emperor Haiku. I am looking at myself. In the mirror, all I see is the right path. From the barber shop, gossip of whole village, murmur of frogs, radiant peace over his reign, power by no other name. Writing on the wall, clamor of countless men, women, and children. From the lowliest hovels, blast of radio, begging bowl, windows shutting fast, allegiance to spare bulk, reverence for portraits, gathered crowds. From his aide's side view mirror, unbroken span, smooth as feather. Even palace bandits err. The right path is not always correct. The bugle blows, summons to the palace, swords unsheathing. Flames and flowers burning in flames, earth swallowing fields of threads, faces and names hanging in black trees, white summer heat. The sword raised high, eyes in the hole, men on their knees.
So now we have more solidarity messages from other organizations. We have a message from the Global Pinoy Diaspora Canada, from the Filipino American Human Rights Alliance, Malaya Movement Seattle, and Malaya Movement USA. And this will be followed by a couple more cultural performances by Lynn Plaza and Nick Plaza, and by Roger Rigor.
Global Pinoy Diaspora Canada was born out of the escalating dispute in the West Philippine Sea, which started with a call for global prayer for Spratlys and a request to organize in Vancouver from U.S. Pinoy for Good Governance Chair Mrs. Loida Levis from New York on August 21, 2011, which followed a global diaspora summit in Manila in September 2011 and the Rome summit in 2012. Filipino delegates from 24 countries that convened in Manila under the Office of Commission of Filipinos Overseas with Secretary Imelda Nicolas, organized a global council, the Global Filipino Diaspora Council, and the Rome Summit, which bore the European Network of Filipino Diaspora. In 2013, as the Spratly disputes are getting uglier with China, the Spratly became the main focus of the group advocacy in alliances with U.S. Pinoy for good governance. Despite the main advocacy is China, Global Pinoy continues to join forces to protest with the U.S. groups on other issues, corruption, pork barrel, taking the issues to the streets or the gates of the Chinese consulate in Vancouver. Winning the case of the Philippines against China with the International Arbitral Tribunal under UNCLOS, we thought was the end of the fight. It was just the beginning. It was no longer a fight against China, but against our own government for abandoning us. It let China continue to violate the UN's decision, deceiving our people with a build economic push, while China continues to steal and rape our natural resources from our territories and islands in our exclusive economic zone. Global Pinoy Diaspora Canada stands in solidarity with Malaya Canada on this historic day as we share the same vision as we join and broaden our forces on the Duterte's war on drugs, human rights, violations, repressive policies, freedom of expressions, corruptions, ill responses to the pandemic, ABS-CBN franchise denial, anti-terror bill. We stand with you, Malaya Canada. Mabuhay.
Mula po sa Filipino-American Human Rights Alliance sa San Francisco, binabati ko po ang mga community organizers, mga kaibigan natin at ang mga magigiting na nagtatagpo ng Malaya, Canada na naglalayong labanan ang extrajudicial killings, ang mga katiwalian sa Pilipinas. Ito po ay malaking hakbangin sa ginawa ninyo. Hindi po kaya ng isang partido, ng isang organisasyon, ng ilang grupo lamang ang paglaban sa isang pasismo, sa isang diktador. Malakas po ang kalaban, nandun sila sa posisyon. Kaya't kailangan po mas marami, mas mahusay po. Alam po natin na bagamat nangihina na ang administrasyon ni Duterte, malaki pa rin ang kapasidad nila na ipagpatuloy ang pagsupil sa karapatan ng mga mamamayan. Hindi po sila susuko na lang, hindi lang nila basta ibibigay ang posisyon, ang kapangyarihan. Kung wala pong isang matatag, makapangyarihan at mga magigiting na mamamayan sa buong mundo na naghihiling na itigil na ang patayan, itigil na ang katiwalian, at bigyan ng hustisya ang mga biktima ni Duterte at ng kanyang mga alipores. 5 taon na po ang nakaraan, mulat sa pool, alam na po natin na pumapatay na ang diktador. Sa Amerika po, ang Filipino-American Human Rights Alliance, ang unang Filipino-American organization po na nagbigay po ng reklamo, ng hinaing sa Kongreso ng Estados Unidos. Ngunit hindi po sapat yon. Kailangan po maraming organisasyon, maraming lahi, maraming gobyerno po ang magsasabing tama na, sobra na. Hindi po natin dapat hayaan ang inhustisya, ang karahasan at ang paniniil ay siyang maging bagong norm sa Pilipinas. Hindi po natin dapat sabihin na ang katiwalain yan, ang diktadurang yan, ay siya pa makapangyayari sa ilang pang taon. Dapat nang wakasan sa maraming forma. Sa eleksyon, sa isang people power, sa isang massive education, sa lahat ng forma po na lehitimo at payapa. Kaya muli po, binabati ko ang mga kaibigan natin dyan sa Canada po. Ang Canada po, yung hindi man perpektong gobyerno yan, marami po mga forma, marami po mga serbisyo, lalo na sa panahon ng COVID, na pwede pong hiramin ang kanilang mga best practices. Critical po na naandyan kayo dahil malaki rin po ang populasyon ng mga Pilipino dyan at malaki rin po ang impluensya ng Canadian government sa pagpigil po at sa pagbigay ng impluensya sa administrasyon ni Duterte upang once and for all po itigil na ang karahasan, itigil na ang patayan at atin ang ilunsad at itayo ang isang gobyernong may malasakit, may awa at nangangako magsisilbi sa taong bayan. Maraming salamat po at mabuhay kayo.
Magandang araw sa lahat. This is Roger Rigor, an active community advocate for the Malaya Movement here in Seattle. Today, allow me to express our solidarity in speaking truth to power. We celebrate with our fellow kababayans from neighboring Canada. This launching of Malaya Canada is a testament to the growing vigilance, united in our demand for answers to the dire situations in the Philippines. Yes, the world today is amidst this pandemic, the consequences of which we can only compare to a world war, where millions have also died. We now talk of the new normal, where thousands are still dying and millions are out of jobs. But consider the new normal in a country like the Philippines, where it has been beset with poverty even before the pandemic. This is where Malaya calls upon all. Malaya whose voices direct our attention to the plight of our people. Under an authoritarian elite, under the Duterte administration, guided by its powerful US and Chinese allies, promoting terror and hunger among our most deprived. Thousands of our innocent poor dead in an unjust war on drugs. Indigenous communities forcibly driven out of their ancestral lands. An anti-terrorist law that is aimed at systematically silencing our people's democratic right to protest. An environment no different from the era of martial law. Malaya is a word that means to be free. And right now our people are not free. Many today are dying of sheer hunger. Many who rise and speak against the system are tragically silenced or harassed, and the reign of unchecked abuse continues. In the spirit of Malaya, we will speak of justice against the forces of power. Together our voices ring louder, inspire courage, and foster change. So to our Canadian counterparts, I leave you this. They may pluck all the flowers away, but spring will still come. Thank you. Maraming salamat po.
Warm greetings and congratulations to Malaya Canada on your national launch from all of your kababayans in the Malaya movement here in the U.S.
In this time when our people back home continue to face an economic and public health crisis made worse by the scourge of tyranny and repression,
we have an opportunity from our unique positions outside of the Philippines to apply international pressure on the Duterte regime.
We must arouse, organize, and mobilize Filipinos in our respective countries to expose Duterte's repression and neglect.
And we must oppose any further support from the Canadian and American governments until he's held to account.
Filipinos around the world must be united in our struggle for a better Philippine society if the promise of a just and lasting peace is to thrive.
We celebrate with you all and recognize this occasion as a victory toward a more united Filipino people around the world.
Mabuhay Malaya Canada,
Mabuhay ang sambayanang Pilipino.
From Malaya Movement in the U.S.
Congratulations, Malaya Canada, for your national launch!
Makibaka! Huwag matakot!
Makibaka!
Huwag matakot!
Congratulations, Canada!
Dinggin mo, karaingan ng ating mamamayan. Silang naghirap sa ilalim ng kapihan. Silang masang dapat mong paglingkuran. Dapat mong paglingkuran, magsasaka. Gandang kahon na tali sa lupa. Lupa na kailanman hindi mapasa kanya. Hanggat itong talikalay, lagutin niya. Api ka magsasaka. Tingnan mo, pagmasdan mo ang ating kapaligiran. Kapihan makikita mo kahit saan. Natili na lang ba kayang ganyan? Manggagawa sa pawis at dugo ang siyang nakukuha. Ngunit ang bunga ng kaniyang hirap at dusa, lumuluha man siya'y walang makukuha. Api ka manggagawa. Tingnan mo, pagmasdan mo ang ating kapaligiran. Kapihay makikita mo kahit saan. Manatili na lang ba kayang ganyan? Kumilos ka, baguhin mo ang ating kapaligiran. Mag-isa ka sa ating mamayan. Pilipino kang may pananagutan. Pilipino kang may pananagutan.
Nakatanggap ako ng sulat mula sa amin. Nakalarawan doon ang marami kong alaala. At bigla akong lumuha dahil ako'y sabik na sa lalawigan kong ninumutya. Naghihintay pa rin ang iro ko doon sa amin. Mga magulang na may nag-aalala sa akin. Umasilayan ko man lamang, bundok parang at batis. Gumagaan ang hirap ko pa sa akin. Awitin ko'y makauwi na sa duyan ng aking kamusmusan. sa piling mo, O Sierra Madre. Kandungan mo'y laging hinahanap. Ano kaya ang gagawin ko ngayong wala nang natitirang pag-asa sa aking mga pangarap? Kaya't kung mayroon mang nakikinig sa aking damdamin, ay dalhin mo na ang awit ko sa amin. Awitin ko'y makauwi na sa duyan ng aking kamusmusan. Sa piling mo, O Sierra Madre, kandungan mo'y laging hinahanap. Kandungan mo'y laging hinahanap. Kandungan mo'y laging hinahanap.
Thank you so much for all those great messages of solidarity and also for our cultural performances. We are actually at the end of that portion of our program. We only have calls to action, community announcements, and our group picture left. So I would like to remind you that we do have an open letter to the Prime Minister, and we only have 4 signatures left until we reach 400. So please sign if you haven't already. I'm going to put the links in the chat also. We also have an e-petition from iChirp Canada, which Patricia mentioned during their solidarity message. Please sign it. It's to the House of Commons to get greater accountability for Canadian companies operating overseas. Malaya Canada is also very pleased to announce that we are using our launch today to also launch our Junk Terror Law campaign. You can learn how to pressure your politicians by emailing them, calling them, tweeting them, and getting them to respond and denounce the anti-terror law. It's at junkterrorlaw.ca.carrd.co. You can learn how to take provincial specific responses to your MPs and get them to take action. We'd also like to use this opportunity to get you to join us. So we'd like you to go to bit.ly/join Malaya Canada, and please join our movement. We're really happy to see all of you here today. We want to get to know you more, so please join us. You can also find a link to that form on our website, malaya.ca. We also have a link tree from Buy in Canada that's actually compiled all these links, so you can find them in one easy place. So please look at the chat and you will see the links to all of the actions that we've asked you to take part in today.
And also, now that we have done our launch, we'd like to invite you to our upcoming events. On the 26th of September, we have an event, democracy event, Philippines in the Shadows of Martial Law. The link to this Facebook event will be pasted by Lara in the chat, so you can check it out. Also on the 30th of September, we have linking Indigenous struggles across borders, defending Cordillera Philippines. And now until September 30, we also have the documentary 1,000 Cuts virtual screening. If you visit this website, bit.ly 1,000 cuts-watch, you'll be able to watch this for this particular time, and we'll be having a discussion around that as well. Of course, the easiest way to get a hold of the different events that are happening through Malaya Canada is by following us through our website, but also through our Facebook page, Malaya Movement Canada. And before we even get to, we're now getting to the end. So we'd like again to thank all our participants for today's launch. And of course, a special thank you to our special guest speakers. We have Attorney Philip Sawali, who is of course speaking on behalf of Senator Laila De Lima. And also we'd like to say a special thank you as well to Attorney Loida Nicolas Lewis, who has graced this event and shared her message and inspired everyone to keep on fighting the fight and fighting for freedom in the Philippines. Paglaban sa isang malayang Pilipinas. So now, now that everyone is still here, I'm going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm inviting everyone that has their video on and would like to be included in the photo to please turn on your cameras to show our sign of solidarity with each other and fighting for free Philippines para sa isang malayang Pilipinas. So we're inviting everyone to have their screen on, and as well very much inspired too by a couple of the videos and also inspired by the message by Anak Bayan Canada earlier. We'd like to include our call together, a united call by chanting Makibaka, Wag Matakot. Maybe if we can, I think Lara has posted that as well. So again, we're inviting everyone to turn on their cameras, and you can chant with me as a few of our members will also be taking screenshots of this event. So I guess we could start with our chant. Makibaka, wag matakot. Makibaka, wag matakot. Makibaka, wag matakot. Thank you so much. Maraming salamat po, and thank you so much for attending our launch, and we will see you soon in our future events, and please keep in touch with us. Maraming salamat.
Yay. Congratulations, Canada!
Thank you! Thank you all for joining!
Malaya Canada!
Amazing, amazing. Great job.
Mabuhay!
Yes.
Louie!
Thank you. I love all these chaotic voices that are coming out.
Eve, thank you. Very Salamat. Salamat.
Thank you.
Salamat po.
Bye. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. Great job.
Mabuhay, mabuhay.